Time to start the circus. So as I was scrolling through Twitter the other day, I saw some people mention this book and specifically clowning on it. And that book was Blood of Hercules by Jasmine Moss. People were saying like, oh my God, it's like My Immortal, that one Harry Potter fanfic from 2006. And I was like, oh, surely I'll be in for a laugh then. I thought it was just going to be a hee hee ha ha funny time where I just make my video and I'm like, guys, this was so funny, like blah, 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 whatever. No, reading this book took years off my life. It was so bad to the point where I got viscerally angry about how bad it is and had to take frequent breaks in order to salvage what was left of my sanity. So without further ado, hello, welcome back. It is a new day, a new sleigh, and a new video where I have something to say. And today that something will not be very nice. I'm gonna be a little mean about it because I was scrolling through some of the reviews on Goodreads and I don't think you guys were being mean enough. And when I say mean, I'm not saying, oh yeah, we should like bully the author or anything. No, of course not. I'm saying we need to be brutally honest about how awful this book actually is. There has been such a rise in these books that get published and their only focus is tropes, where there is no actual plot. It is just moving from one trope to the next. And liking tropes is not bad, but there should be an actual story. And what we're seeing is a shift where these books that are popular, New York Times bestsellers, are not actually a good example of craft and good storytelling. It's just sandwiching a whole bunch of tropes together, calling it romantasy, and marketing it towards a group of people that want an excuse to read corn in public. Listen, I'm not against romance as a genre. In fact, against my reservations at the start of this year, I've grown a real fondness for the genre. I unironically read the entire Maple Hill series, like for fun. I didn't do it because I was going to review the books on this channel. It was just for my enjoyment. Guys, I even read Lights Out. And that is also a dark romance with morally gray characters and a lot of lines that kind of get blurred throughout the whole story. So I'm not a stranger to these kinds of like darker romance or darker themed stories, but this is a book that genuinely did not understand what that actually is. And honestly, I think to anyone that genuinely enjoys dark romance or romantasy, this is kind of a slap in the face to the genre. This is a parody of what that genre actually is and doesn't understand all of the nuances and what makes those genres successful in the publishing industry. Make no mistake, all of my commentary is really just a greater critique on the publishing industry as it is now because of Book Talk. We are not valuing readers and instead taking advantage of them and their appreciation for these kinds of tropes and using that to sell them this interesting pieces of literature, if you can constitute it as literature, and not taking the care to actually put good stories into the hands of readers. I mean, publishing bad books has always happened, but I think what we're seeing, especially with like romantasy and these like romance tropes, is that they're doing it intentionally just to get that profit. I do have some critiques on the inclusion of sensitive topics, including SA and the inclusion of LGBT representation, which, as I will go into, is actually not good representation, and the portrayal of feminism and feminist mindsets in this book. So I will not be critiquing the author as an individual. I will be more so focusing all my critiques on the way that this book was written and its contents. And if you don't like the way that I go about some of these topics, that's okay. Feel free to let me know in the comments. But I'm going to tell you right now, this will be a brutally honest review. So if you don't want to listen to that, you can click off now. These are all my opinions based on my read of the book. And if you disagree, that's okay. I feel like any book that I've reviewed on the channel, whether I gave it a 1 star or 0 stars, all those books were either like problematic or written poorly. It was never a case where it was both. So this book is a first for the channel where there was absolutely no redeeming qualities about any of it. There was never a single sentence where I thought this was written okay. It was problematic, written poorly at a juvenile level. And now I'm gonna get into all of that. So I hope you're ready. So I was able to identify 4 main problems in Blood of Hercules. First being the storytelling, like language, craft, things of that nature. The plot and the actual flow of the story. The content, that being kind of the social commentary and things of that nature. And finally, the characters and their romance with each other. So first, a brief summary, because obviously if you've made it this far into the video and don't know what Blood of Hercules is, you might be asking, how can one book get Kristen so angry in a way that we've never seen on the channel before? Well, let me give you a summary. Blood of Hercules follows our main character, Alexis Hurt, who is an orphan living in a cardboard box with her foster brother, Charlie. I'm not kidding about the box. These boxes, I don't know where she's getting them. She's given Squidward spare change throughout the whole book. The story is kind of like a Greek retelling where there's a lot of mythology in play. The gods are actually Spartans, where they're not like all powerful beings. It's a little hard to explain, but they're essentially gods. They have all their godly names: Zeus, Persephone, all those good people, right? If you've read Percy Jackson, it'll give you kind of like a leg up when you're reading this book, because God knows that this author, rather I will say, the story requires you to know a little bit about Greek mythology before you get into it, and relies on your background knowledge in order to kind of skate by without really explaining anything. So their world is currently terrorized by Titans, who are being taken care of by this group of people known as the Chthonics. So we have the 12 main people, not Olympians, no, they're Spartans, and they're separated by the Olympian houses and the Chthonic houses. The Olympians are essentially the good guys, and the Chthonics are the bad guys. The Chthonic houses are composed of 4 main leaders, that being Hades, Aphrodite, Artemis, and Ares. Among them, they only have 5 Chthonic children. And the reason that they're the bad guys is because their powers essentially hurt other people, but the Olympians, their powers help people. So because they're the bad guys, they're forced to create what's called the Assembly of Death, and they're in charge of killing all the Titans. The Assembly of Death is made up of the only 5 Chthonic children, that being Augustus, Achilles, Helen, Charon, I don't know. I'm not going to say it that way, but it's supposed to be with that little in it, right? And Patroclus, who they call Patro. I'm going to give another disclaimer right now. I love the Song of Achilles, okay? To me, in my mind, that is the only version of Patroclus and Achilles that can exist. I accept no other retelling of their story. Is that 100% biased? Yeah. Does that affect my review? 100%. Do I care? No. I'm sorry, but when you have a book that is so iconic as the Song of Achilles, it's really hard to go in the absolute opposite direction of that portrayal. Imagine if someone tried to do another Greek retelling with Percy as the main character, and it was the complete opposite of Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Of course they're going to get compared to each other. And of course people are going to have a hard time because one version is so iconic. So already the whole Patro thing was not sitting well with me, to say the least. But anyway, so we have those 2 dynamics, and then we have Alexis, who is a normal human person. She lives in Montana. She is homeless, and everyone hates her, but she's actually stunningly beautiful, which no one will acknowledge because she's homeless. One day she takes what's called the Spartan Merit Test, which is essentially a college entrance exam. But when she pricks her finger to give them her blood, it sets the paper on fire, and they're like, oh my God, you are actually Spartan. So she's dropped into this world of Sparta where she has to fight for her life and discover her power alongside her mentors, Patro and Achilles, all while fighting the patriarchy and arguing with her teachers because she's a woman and she deserves to be in the classroom. And at the same time, she has her little animal sidekick and she has to figure out her place in Sparta. And, as the title and the blurb in the back of the book will tell you, she's actually Hercules. Not a bad setup. Very reminiscent of teen dystopian novels. I was okay with it. I was even okay with the way that the blurb was written at the back of the book in a very Wattpad-esque summary of Oh my god. So that's the gist of the story, and now I'm gonna go more into like the beat for beat plot. I'm gonna condense it as much as possible without spoiling any of the other problematic stuff, but there is spoilers for the overall book, so if you don't want to know, click off the video now. Although, I mean, spoilers would have to indicate that there's an actual plot to spoil. So with that being said, let's go into the plot of this book. So we get the backstory at the very beginning of the book that in Sparta, they are implementing a marriage law, meaning that all Spartans have to get married at the age of 26. The reason that they cite is because they're having population problems. They need people to make babies. But actually, the real reason that they're putting in this marriage law is because they want to keep the Chthonics under control. They want to really keep them under their thumb. The issue I take with this is because obviously the marriage law insinuates that children cannot be born out of wedlock, which I'm like, if you're trying to tell me that the Greek gods are not just pumping out children, if you're trying to tell me that Zeus is loyal to his wife, you're joking. No one in history has dared to rewrite that history. No one has been so delusional to insinuate that they're not having kids outside of their marriages. So that's one thing that I found interesting. And then the secret, like, backdoor reason for this law is also nonsensical, because there is never any indication that the Chthonics are not already under their control. I mean, they force them to fight Titans when they don't have to. Also, there's 9 of them in total, and there is significantly more Olympians. I just failed to see like what the concern was. Like, was there a war that was boiling up at some point? The only reason they have this marriage contract is so that they can set up our main character for a marriage of convenience trope without actually understanding what that is. This might come as a surprise, but I actually like that trope. There's a webtoon that I read. It's called Maybe Meant to Be. It also is a marriage of convenience. Very, very good. Love that webtoon. I'm not unfamiliar with this trope, but again, I feel like after reading this whole book, there is a clear misunderstanding of what that actually is and why it's so like enticing in a romance book and why people like it. Hello, this is Context Kristen. There's some things I need to clear up. So the reason I said that the book doesn't understand what a marriage of convenience trope actually is because there is no convenience for Alexis to get in this marriage. I will provide more details on the specifics of this marriage, but in short, 2 of her love interests, Karen and Augustus, coerce her into this marriage. They take advantage of her and essentially put her in a corner where she can't say no to them, where 2 people get into a marriage of convenience because it benefits both of them, and it is for the most part consensual. She was 100% coerced into this marriage, so this is not a good example of marriage of convenience. Anyway, back to the present. But anyway, moving on. So we go into the story. We start with Alexis. She's 9 years old. She is living with her foster parents, who are essentially like Disney villains. Like, they hate her, but for really no reason. So at the beginning of the book, she gets a foster brother, Charlie, and he is mostly nonverbal. And she also makes friends with an invisible snake who is named Nyx. So at the start of the book, she gets into a fight with her foster parents because they're planning to off Charlie. And she's like, no, my foster brother. So they fight, right? And her foster mom gets unalived by a Titan, and they send her father away to prison forever. So now they're living alone. They live in cardboard boxes. They really want you to know that it's a cardboard box. So then we flash forward and she's in high school and she's about to take the Spartan merit test. So once she's done, she has to prick her finger and put a drop of blood on one of the squares on the test, whatever, and it burns up. And they're like, oh my God, she's Spartan. So they call the authorities and they come to take her and they're like, oh my God, you stupid women. You keep trying to sneak into Sparta to look at Achilles and Patro. They call them the Crimson Duo. So he injects her with adrenaline or something and is like, you're gonna die in 1 minute. So I have 1 minute to explain to you all of this plot. And no joke, this side character just like extemporaneously is explaining everything you need to know as the reader. It's not subtle, but I guess it's not uncommon for books on Wattpad in 2012. And I don't even want to disrespect Wattpad writers like that. I feel like they have more tact than that. And then lo and behold, she survives their little injection and they're like, oh my God, you're a Spartan. Let's send you to this massacre. So she is transported into this like Coliseum where she and 23 other children, a boy and a girl from each district. Oh wait, that's the wrong book. She has to essentially fight all these other kids to the death, which she does. And for some reason, like once the smoke clears and she wins miraculously, she's also naked. They, for some reason, ripped off her clothes and she wasn't granted that like anime world logic where only a strip of fabric covering her sensitive areas is left.
You don't want to mess with me, you bastard!
No, she is full on naked. And then because she is so like girl boss pussy power feminist, she says, free the nipple and the lips, parentheses, vaginal. Like, you mean to tell me someone actually typed that out and thought it was either A, serious, B, funny, or C, necessary, which it was none of those things. So it's her and like 10 other people. They're all assigned mentors, but Alexis gets 2 because she's special. And by special, I mean getting set up for a threesome with Patroclus and Achilles. I'm not going to call him Patroclus because my Patroclus, where are you, baby? My Patroclus that exists in the Song of Achilles would never do the stuff of the Patroclus in this book. He's Patro in here. So they transport her back to their home, yell at her and call her stupid over and over before she is taken to what's called the Crucible, which is essentially her training arc as she learns things that are unclear as to why she needs to know. Like, they have a whole class that's dedicated to math, and the only reason because her like character trait is that she's really good at math. She's Katie Heron from Mean Girls. And she also has this weird obsession with mathematicians. And she's like, oh my God, Carl Gauss is so hot. I'm gonna look up a picture of this dude. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up right now. She has this whole character trait where she is so obsessed with this one mathematician dude named Carl Gauss. And she's like, oh my God, I wrote fan fiction about him, like R-rated. And he's like so hot. And I'm thinking about his junk. Get a fucking grip. I just looked up a picture of this dude. What the fuck is wrong with you? This is not even like a hear me out. This is not like a funny, like, oh yeah, I'm attracted to this person that is like so obviously like not someone people should be attracted to. This is just fucking stupid. No disrespect to Carl Gauss, but come on. So most of the plot is her in the Crucible, which is like this compound, if you will. The area is not like set up very well. And the way the teachers talk to her is like that one driving instructor from SpongeBob where he's like, rule number 1, no eating in my class. Would anyone care for a bonbon?
No eating in my classroom!
Like, it was funny in SpongeBob. It's just like ridiculous here. And reading through her time in the Crucible, there is a specific writing choice, I will call it, that Alexis frequently, because we get most of the book in her perspective, is in like a psychotic state where she is just jumping back and forth between scenes. And there's essentially no transitions. Like, she will just suddenly appear in a new location and have no idea how she got there. And will actually say in her dialogue of like, oh, when did I get to the library? Or, oh, suddenly I'm running. I don't know how I got here. And the first time I was like, okay, well, her body is being pushed to physical limits. She's being forced to run like up a mountain, all this other crap. She like can't eat. So that kind of like weird hallucinogenic state is understandable. But then it kept happening even when she was outside of the Crucible. And I mean, using time jumps is not uncommon for books, but time jumps should be used purposefully, not as like, I don't know, as a cover up for an inability to write transitions between scenes. I really couldn't say if it's an inability to write transitions or whatever, but it is definitely a choice, and I don't think it was a good one. Like, I really don't see the purpose in this book of the jump cuts, especially because they are so frequent. Anyway, everyone is mean to her in the Crucible because she's a woman and they hate women. And it all comes to a head when she's invited to this like party that is actually just an So her teacher, Augustus, one of the Chthonic heirs, doesn't want her to go because she's a woman and it would damage her honor. And his whole character is that he hates that she's there because she's a woman. And we even have like a cute little chapter from his perspective where he's like, I'm not anti-feminism. I'm not a misogynist. I just think that women are delicate and should not be subjected to things of this nature, and that they constantly need me, a man, to protect them. But I'm not a misogynist. He is so against her going to this party that he uses his powers to try to mind control her into not going, but she fights it off because she's, again, slay queen, girl boss. And at the venue, she finds out that she can talk to sirens, these like mythical creatures that are essentially sex objects. Anyway, she befriends these sirens, and Augustus and Karen, yeah, I'm calling his ass Karen, I don't give a fuck, equally get mad at her because she started to like strip at the party. And by strip, I mean she lowered her sleeve. She exposed her shoulder. Like literally, they are the embodiment of that one like wolf meme of like, she's mine. That's exactly what they did. So they go up to her and they're like, Alexis, what the fuck are you doing? I wish I could be lying right now. That is exactly how the voice actor delivers those lines.
What the fuck are you doing?
And to a degree, you know, it's not her fault because she is only reading what she's given. But as a side note, I will say that the audiobook performance was not my favorite. And part of that is obviously because the book is not good. It's just that like they make this person like really deepen their voice to do the male voices, which I thought was interesting because they had separate voice actors to do the chapters in those perspectives. Like Patro, Karen, and Augustus all had separate voice actors, and they didn't just have them read their lines. They forced this person to deepen their voice, which was completely out of their range, to a point where I had to constantly go back and re-listen because I couldn't understand what she was saying.
Patro and Achilles, why don't you go get Alexis's room ready for her?
It's really hard to not bring up like other critiques as they come, but let me focus on the summary real quick. Anyway, Augustus gets mad, literally drags her from the party, and then later she is delivered this very ornate gift box, and when she opens it, she finds the eyeballs of one of the sirens that was talking to her. Now, understandably, the only actual rational reaction that this character has, she gets freaked out. Someone sent her body parts. And at the same time, Alexis is receiving threats in her textbooks, and she just kind of ignores it, but these will come up later. I will say this is like a pretty major plot point because it actually relates to the overall story, and it only comes up 60% of the way through the book. The book continues with Augustus and Karen being so obsessive and possessive of her to the point where they are like constantly choking her out, cussing her out, and just like invading her space and privacy. But it's like so romantic because they're men. Then also at some point she makes a bond with an animal protector that is like a deformed bunny. If you get it, you get it. And then also at some point one of her classmates, a dude, kisses her without her consent, and she just kind of like stands there and is like, okay. To which the boys, Augustus and Karen, also get mad and then again deliver her a box with his eyeballs and lips. To which some people might say like, oh my god, they're so like protective of her, it's so romantic. No. So then she gets to the end of her training. Yippee, she's about to graduate, become immortal, all that good stuff. She goes to a dance that is a masquerade party, and she's approached by two people in wolf masks who then forcibly take her onto the dance floor after she repeatedly tells them no, sandwiches her between them so that she cannot escape, and then grope her. We're gonna revisit that scene a little bit later, but in case you were wondering, and in case it wasn't obvious, it was actually Augustus and Karen, and they knew who she was, but she didn't know who they were. Anyway, at this dance, someone screams, Titans are attacking, and in the commotion, Alexis and Helen, who is also here, are abducted and taken to a Titan-infested area because surprise, Theros, the heir to the house of Zeus, actually kidnapped her because they found out, oh, I didn't explain this, I'm sorry. So when Alexis was discovered as a Spartan mutt, they were trying to figure out like who were her parents, and she has like golden hair and golden skin or whatever, so they thought that she was the daughter of Zeus. Theros, who is the current heir, was like, you are threatening my birthright, I have to kill you now. So he leaves her to get eaten by titans, which they don't actually do. She breaks her wrists to get out of her little like handcuffs or whatever. She helps break Helen out, and then together they teleport back into the graduation ceremony, which is like another arena. And she attacks Theros to the point where Patro has to intervene and kind of like talk her down because, surprise, Alexis is not the daughter of Zeus, she is actually Chthonic. She's not an Olympian. So they find out that her blood has the ability to, off people. And surprise, revelation, Alexis figures out that she has unintentionally unalived a lot of people. And everyone's like, wait a minute, but the Chthonics have not had children in like forever. They are like famously infertile. And then it comes to light that she is actually Hercules, the daughter of Hades and Persephone. I've seen a lot of liberties taken with Greek retellings. I think this is by far the most ambitious of them. Like when I was like really deep in my Percy Jackson phase, I got so mad at Disney. I was like, how dare they, first of all, use the word Hercules when it's actually supposed to be Heracles? And how dare they make him the son of Zeus and Hera? That is incorrect. I thought that that was the epitome of disrespect to Greek mythology. Oh boy, how this pales in comparison to the blood of Hercules. So then, while this revelation is coming out, everyone's like, oh, well, she participated in the Crucible, and that is dishonorable. We need to figure out a way to salvage her honor. We need to marry her off. And Persephone is like, no. She just was reunited with us. Give us all a moment, if you please. But then, as everyone is like fighting for her hand in marriage, Augustus and Karen come up and they're like, actually, she's betrothed to us. Because surprise, those eyeballs in gift boxes were actually symbols of betrothal. And because she opened them, she accepted their betrothal. She also unintentionally accepted a sweatshirt and a blanket from them. So they were like, yep, that's all we need. And despite knowing that they used her ignorance about Spartan culture against her to force her into a marriage, and even after the gods are like, hey, you can tell us like if this wasn't, to your knowledge, like please feel free to elaborate. She's like, it's true. I accepted their proposal. She folded under no pressure. She had no kind of self-preservation and didn't try to protest the betrothal at all. Anyway, she's so distraught that she teleports back to her foster brother Charlie, because we remember Charlie even though Alexis doesn't. She teleports back to him. They spend the night, and soon after, Augustus, Karen, Patro, and Achilles go find them. They almost kill Charlie because, man, don't go near my woman. And then they find out that he's her brother. And then they all go back to Sparta, where she is married off to Augustus and Karen. And to celebrate their matrimony, they feast on her on the altar of their wedding ceremony. Like, we go straight into, BDSM territory, like right off the bat. They've been married for all of maybe 5 minutes, and she has no qualms about any of this happening. She's very okay with it until she finds out, she discovers that they've actually been stalking her the whole time, watching over her as she slept, touching her as she slept, and she gets mad about it. And the book ends on the cliffhanger of like, oh my god, how will this their happy married life end up for them? So yippee, we're at the end of the book. But let me go a little bit more in depth into some of the problems I had with it, specifically the content, the characters, the relationships, and things of that nature. So first and foremost, this book is a really bad example of feminism. It is feminist in the same way that like Andrew Tate is feminist. Everything is so surface level, and they just use a whole bunch of buzzwords. For example, in one scene, Alexis punches this dude, and her snake companion Nyx says things like, let me pull up my quotes. So when she punches the guy, Nyx is like, oh my god, slay queen, and actually says things like pussy power and crush the patriarchy because she punched a dude. The worst part is I think that this is supposed to be serious, or at the very least that this book is actually supposed to be feminist, when at the same time we have characters playing into misogynistic stereotypes. In one scene, Alexis is like, a man was talking and therefore I did not listen, and then in the same breath is like, yeah, women actually are hysterical. Hysteria is a woman problem. And we know that the word has been used to dismiss women's issues and concerns, especially in denying them things like healthcare. There is also a moment in which she's talking to Helen and she plays into the stereotype that female friend groups are catty and all they do is gossip. And that's all from Alexis. That's not even going into Augustus, her love interest, who is constantly trying to preserve her honor and talks about how delicate she is and how she needs someone to protect her. Sorry, not someone. A man, specifically him, because she's just a stupid woman who doesn't know what's good for her. Like, the anti-feminist rhetoric is coming from all sides to a point where I'm just like, this is worse than girl boss feminism. This sounds to me like someone who's trying to portray feminism without actually understanding what it is, and then forcing that onto their characters, both female and male, which just makes them unlikable. Also on the topic of feminism, I think that our main character, Alexis, really plays into this trope known as Born Sexy Yesterday. So Born Sexy Yesterday, as most people talk about it, is mostly focused in film, where you have a character that is conventionally attractive and yet simultaneously naive or innocent or otherwise ignorant about sex. And this could not be more true than with Alexis, because as we know, she is described as being very conventionally attractive. The people around her are constantly making advances at her and she doesn't understand what's happening. She reacts in a very childlike manner to where she will have these men literally pressed up against her and she's misunderstanding the situation entirely, to the point where she has to have her animal companion, Nyx, tell her when someone is actually interested in her because she literally cannot see it. There's a point at the beginning of the story where someone is talking to her and they express some kind of interest and she completely flushes in embarrassment because she's like, oh my god, he's propositioning me for it. She's 19 years old, by the way. She turns 20 in the book. There's also moments in the story where she's in the room next to Patro and Achilles and can hear squeaking and something banging up against the wall and has no idea what it actually is. And yet, at the same time, a lot of her inner monologue is very sexual in nature, where she talks about writing R-rated fan fiction of that one mathematician, Carl Gauss, and is constantly thinking about male appendages. So it's really like we couldn't determine whether or not she knows nothing about sex or is constantly starved for it. The problem is that Alexis as a character is heavily infantilized, and to the point where even her dialogue just doesn't portray someone who is 19 years old. There is a point where she's half conscious and she gets picked up by Achilles and she pats his head and says, "Nice doggy." And that is supposed to be like snarky, funny, romantic, whatever. But to me, that's what a child says when they see a dog. I have to constantly remind myself that she is 19 and not 12. Also, something I forgot to mention about Born Sexy Yesterday is that Alexis has this whole thing where she can't swear. Like, in her mind, she constantly says things like, frick you, or go to heck. Like, she just can't bring herself to say a cuss word, which I think also plays into this infantilization Born Sexy Yesterday. Like, she functions as a child. You get this so much more when you listen to the audiobook. Like, the direction that they went with the reading of these lines really communicates child to me. I don't know how it is when you read the actual book, but it is extremely evident in the audiobook, and it's just gross. Like, a grown adult woman should be able to say a swear word. It's not just that she doesn't like to swear, it's that she literally can't bring herself to do it. Like, she legitimately practices and the only thing she can say is like frick. Anyway, back to the rest of the video. Thank you. There's also a scene where she's at that and people are making fun of her for being prude and she gets all nervous. She like flushes red and she's just so embarrassed about her inexperience, which again just plays up this Born Sexy Yesterday trope where she knows absolutely nothing about sex and yet is very hypersexualized by all the characters around her and very willing to engage in these acts to play out the male fantasy. Speaking of male fantasies, let's get into her love interests and the romance. So she has a total of 4 male love interests in this book. It's very harem. First, we have Augustus, who is the heir to the House of Ares. I think he is. I'm actually not certain, and I don't care to look back and check. So he's her teacher in the Crucible, and, you know, he's just your good old-fashioned predator. He is creepy and weird. There is no sugarcoating it. Literally nothing is redeemable about that man. He looks like fucking Cruella de Vil. And I call him a predator and a weirdo because there is a scene where he is talking about Alexis, in his point of view, by the way, and he says, oh, she's delicate, just like my sister Helen. And then, in the next breath, gets an erection thinking about Alexis. I'm like, you just compared this girl to your sister and then got turned on. Then we have Karen, and his first interaction with her is like him chasing her on a boat. They really don't have any substantial conversations with each other, and all his perspective chapters is him looking at her and getting turned on. Oh yeah, and he was the one that actually sent his dogs to spy on her so that he could look through their eyes and watch her at every single point in time. So he was the one stalking her. Love interest, once again. Then we have Patro, who, again, we've already established is in a semi-committed relationship with Achilles. He spends a lot of the book, like, just cussing her out and hating her very existence, and then for no reason at all, just switches, like, with no buildup, and suddenly likes her. And then we have Achilles, who, in this book, wears a muzzle, literally has zero conversation with Alexis, and is somehow in love with her. Like, they don't even have a scene together where it's just them. Nothing to indicate that they know anything about each other or have any kind of connection. And yet there's a chapter where he hits us with the literally, she's ours. Overall, the romance between these 4 men and Alexis is non-existent. For the people that are picking this up because of the romance, I beg you, raise your standards. The romance is better in a Colleen Hoover book. Look at me in my face when I'm telling you this. The romance is better in It Ends With Us. You know how low the bar has to be for people to find this enjoyable? I've talked a lot about like Colleen Hoover and some of these other like romance books, but guys, this romance is just crumbs. First of all, if you're gonna read it for the corn aspect, there's only one scene. Everything else is them just like brushing up against each other and them being like, oh my god, Alexis, and her being like, why the fuck are they looking like that? Like her just completely being unaware of the situation. It is truly just obsession, but not in like a cute, like, oh my god, he's so like pathetically obsessed with her kind of way. Like, this is not Anthony Bridgerton by any means. This is not Josh from Lights Out. This is like, I can't even think of anything that's remotely this bad. Yeah, this is just like straight up stalker, straight up predator. They try to give us some scenes of like tenderness where they're taking care of her, but she's usually like passed out for most of it or like completely delirious, so there's no actual like depth to those scenes at all. And when you read the end of the book, it kind of just frames those scenes of like, oh, they're only taking care of her because they need to marry her in order to get the loophole in the 26-year marriage contract or whatever. Because I don't think I gave this explanation, but the reason that Augustus and Karen wanted to marry her in the first place was because as part of their marriage contract, because they're 26, they have to get married to another Spartan, right? But the Olympians wrote in the law that they can't get married to other Chthonics, which would essentially force them to get married to an Olympian. They didn't want to do that. They didn't want to soil the bloodline, so they found a loophole. In the law, they listed the names of all 10 Chthonics, and they were like, you can't get married to these people on this list. But Alexis wasn't on the list, so they were like, okay, we can marry her and keep the bloodline strong. Which the rhetoric of keeping a bloodline pure is a little bit going into eugenics territory. I don't know if we're ready to have that conversation yet. But anyway, all their scenes that they have with Alexis are just very like power imbalance. They're just like exerting all their dominance on her. There is really no care and affection, and there's never any point where I think that they actually feel anything towards her other than, you know, possessive and domineering. This is not an enemies to lovers. This is abuser to Stockholm syndrome induced love affair. with no actual love. And if anyone wants to say like, oh my God, it'll get developed in the next book, like just wait. No, you should be able to sell at least partly this romance to me in the first book. I should not have to wait for the second one. The way that enemies to lovers works is that when they start off as enemies, the transition is that the main character or whoever starts getting scenes with their love interest. And these scenes will specifically highlight their humanity to indicate that there is something more to meets the eye. Like there is something behind this like dark exterior and there's actually redeeming qualities about them. It's not, oh, these characters just constantly choke me out, say that I'm theirs and strip away all of my autonomy, but they give good head, so who cares? No, that is not how an enemies to lovers actually works. Like there is nothing about these men that is redeeming at all. We get no sense that they're actually human, and there's every indication that they're just evil monsters that take advantage of her. Especially because you have characters like Augustus getting so viscerally angry and jealous of Alexis's brother. He literally choked her, threw her up against the wall and was like, who is Charlie? First of all, that's her brother. I feel like I've read this story on Reddit. Get a grip, man. It's not written well. It makes me so angry. I feel like you should have at least one character that you kind of like. None of these people are likable. Actually, I take that back. There is one guy. His name is Drex. He's friends with Alexis. He's pretty cool. Although his character is kind of funny because like all the other characters that are in her class in the Crucible, right? They have first name and then last name associated with whatever Olympian is their parent. So think like John Poseidon, Louis Demeter, shit like that, right? Drex is the only one that doesn't have a godly last name. You want to know what his is? It's Drex Chen. I'm like, we got a Cho Chang situation from Harry Potter on here. Oop, this is not a good look. Anyway, he's pretty cool. And the only reason I think that is because he doesn't have a lot of lines. Then we get into the LGBTQ representation in this book, which is like non-existent. The inclusion of polyamory and other sexual orientations in this book is not actually good representation at all, because it's only used in a way to play into fantasies about having multiple partners. There is a scene between Patro and Achilles where they are in the act, and the scene is only used again for fan service because we know how boy love and homosexual relationships are heavily sexualized in romance genres. Giving a little bit more context on Patro and Achilles, their relationship is obviously sexual in nature, but we never get anything more than that. Like two men in a relationship with each other should have like maybe some more emotional connection or otherwise depth to their relationship, but they really don't have any, and it's the exact same with Augustus and Karen, where you never get the sense that they actually have any kind of relationship with each other, which if you're gonna argue polyamory, they have to kind of have an attraction to each other. It's not a great representation because what it does is really just exploits polyamorous relationships to fulfill a fantasy for straight women. Like polyamory would indicate that they all like each other. Alexis has to like Karen and Augustus. Augustus has to have some kind of attraction to Karen as well as Alexis. It's not just two men and one girl. It's not a threesome. It is a polyamorous, meaning love, some kind of emotional connection with each other. So it's not a great representation, and it just sexualizes these kinds of relationships, which does a disservice to them. Especially when we go as far as to disrespect asexual people. There is a scene in which they're at the little party with the sirens, and there is someone who we later find out is Karen at the piano bench, kind of like fighting off people as they're climbing on him and groping him. And Nyx, our animal companion, says, I wonder why this person can possibly be fighting off these suitors. They must be asexual. Because why would anyone reject unwanted sexual attention if they weren't asexual? Maybe. I don't know. People just don't want to be groped. Speaking of that scene, let's get into the SA that is all over this book. As I mentioned earlier, there is a scene with Augustus and Karen where they are masked and they start touching Alexis. Now, at first, her reaction is fear, which is normal, but inexplicably, she starts getting turned on by it and she starts falling into it and she likes it, which I will say because, nuance, even in situations of SA where whatever is happening is not happening by consent, your body can have physical reactions that you just cannot control. That is not an indicator of your enjoyment or your consent to whatever is happening. But for Alexis, in her inner monologue, she conveys that she's enjoying it. That despite her initial fear, she feels the butterflies. She's like really into these sensations as, again, these people who she doesn't know who they are under the mask are touching her. And I don't think that is a reflection on the character and more so the writing. Because we can't have Alexis be scared of her love interest. We can't have her really think about what they're doing to her and how she actually hasn't given informed consent. And instead it has to be like a sexy scene, a spicy scene. It has to be something that she enjoys. There should have at least been a transition where we as the reader are given a clear indicator that she is at some point consenting to what is happening to her, so that the scene doesn't come across as nothing more than fan service. There's also a scene in which, again, Augustus gets jealous of her brother and demands to know who this Charlie person is while having her pinned up against a wall and forcibly spreading her legs open. For what reason? None. I fear that these scenes are all supposed to be portrayed as romantic, and it's just evil and gross, and it should not have been included. And overall, I think all the problems I've outlined about this book can be summed up by the fact that this is just bad writing. All of this could be fixed if, I don't know, there was actual care and consideration. If someone went back to add more context, more explanations for why certain things are happening. So now I'm just going to talk about the writing because it is just so all-encompassing of all the problems in this book. A lot of the language is pulled straight from TikTok, and honestly, I would be convinced that this was written by AI. There is an unnecessary level of cussing in this book where like the characters are saying in every single sentence. And like, I'm not against swearing. I swear frequently in my day-to-day life, but I think in writing, you should use it more purposefully. Like, this book sounds like it was written by a 10-year-old who realized they have free will and can swear if they want to. It's just so egregious and unnecessary. They also repeat a lot of the same words, like characters are constantly fisting their hands, which I think means clenching. There is the overuse of filthy abandoned mutt when referring to Alexis, and phantom pain. Alexis constantly feels this phantom pain, which I would argue is misused in the book because she talks about this instance in which she was bound by her foster parents and she has like scars on her wrists because of it, and it like gives her phantom pain. But the way we talk about that term in normal day-to-day life is with amputees, where that phantom pain is in the limb that they no longer have. So I would argue that this is just a misuse of that word, and we should have just found another way to describe it because there's already an association with phantom pain, and using it in this way, like, I understood what you meant, but it was a little confusing. Not to mention that there's just so many plot holes, again, because of the writing. There is this character, Father John, who is referenced frequently in the book. We never meet this dude. We never know who he actually is. There was also an attempt at deadpan humor that was a failure, in which Alexis makes a lot of jokes about offing herself, and they just come across as like someone trying to represent what those jokes are without actually knowing what makes them funny. Like when you say something is your 13th reason, the joke is that it's something so minor in comparison where it's just like, yep, this is my last straw. But what I think this person thought the humor of those jokes is just like repeating it a billion times to the point where it just like loses meaning as a joke. And I'm qualified to talk about these jokes, and I can make these jokes because I did try to pull a Hannah Baker when I was 13. So it comes from some years of experience. And I can tell you that the way that this person is trying to make these jokes, like it's not funny. It loses its value. There's also a lot of dialogue from Alexis that is very overused and supposed to play into that deadpan humor, but just doesn't work. She'll say things like, oh my God, someone snored in class. Oh wait, that was me. And then she'll say things like, oh, and I told him to go shove a stick up his ass. But I only said that in my head. What I actually did was, bruh, please. Especially with how frequently she says these kinds of things, it loses its humor. Like, there is no more punchline. You've overused the joke. It's giving that one clip of the comedy special where this girl is like, most people think I'm confident, but I'm actually just loud. Like, that's what this is. That's all of Alexis's dialogue. All of the problems can really be summed up by the fact that the writing is just so juvenile. I don't even want to say that I could probably find this on Wattpad in 2015 because I think the quality of writing was better. There's a lot of info dumping, a lot of holes, the dialogue is very clunky, and nothing is developed. Like, this book is funny in the way that fart jokes from a 6-year-old are funny. Overall, the whole story just falls so epically flat. This is one of like really the first instances where I felt like I wish I could have gotten that time back. I wish I could go back in time and stop myself from reading this book. This needs to get unpublished. Someone needs to press the undo, stop the prince, please. And we need to have a semi-serious discussion about the kind of stuff we're publishing nowadays. Because again, I think that this book was just trying to play on a lot of tropes that are popular on Book Talk and sell a story that lacked soul in all aspects. There was really nothing of substance with this book in its messaging, even in the romance. Like, if you're just reading this for the corn aspect, like, you can do better. I'm sorry, I don't think anyone could convince me that this book is good. I don't think there's any redeeming qualities about it. Yeah, I don't believe anyone actually liked this book. I think all those 5-star reviews are fabricated. There's no way they're real. I'm sorry, this book is just so bad. And I'm gonna say that that's objective. Like, I tried so hard. Because I was like, surely something will make me laugh. Surely something about this book will actually make it worth reading. No, there's nothing. I'm normally really down for a Greek retelling. I'm so down with mythology all the time. I'm genuinely going to have to take a break from reading Greek retellings if this is what we have. If this is the best we can come up with this year. But anyway, that's the end of the video. I can't keep ranting about this book because I'm just gonna make myself more mad, and it's Christmas. I'm recording this on Christmas. Where's my spirit? It died along with my soul once I finished this book. But anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments. If you agree, disagree. If you like the review, just let it all loose. I think I've officially found the worst read of 2024. Yay for me. If you want to look at my live updates as I was reading the book, feel free to check out my Goodreads account. You can also follow me on my social media at Listen to Kristen on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Otherwise, yeah, that's the end of the video. This took a lot out of me. Genuinely. I'm spent. I can't say anymore. If I say any more, I'm gonna start really being mean, because if you can believe it, I think I went pretty light on this review. I could be worse. I think I'm gonna give this book, surprise, surprise, a 0 out of 5. If I could give negative stars, I would. Don't subject yourself to it unless you are of strong mind or are a masochist. Anyway, thank you so much for watching the video. Please let me know what you think. I'm gonna go now. Maybe go to a spa or something. I don't know. I'm tired. Thank you.